The absolute clock is ticking on the desert sands, and the silver and black are officially back on the grass for the most high-stakes, pressure cooker offseason we have seen in a generation. 10 days of maximum intensity, voluntary organized team activities are kicking off, and let me tell you, for a handful of veterans and second-year players, the safety net is completely gone. Forget the rookies, forget the undrafted free agents who are just happy to be wearing an NFL shield on their helmets right now. We are talking about the established names, the guys who survived free agency and watched the front office navigate the draft, who are now staring down a roster gridlock that could end their careers in silver and black before the summer even peaks. This isn't a leisurely spring jog, this is an absolute turf war under the blazing sun where legacies will be claimed, depth charts will be completely demolished, and 10 specific players are running out of time to prove they actually belong in this long-term vision. If you want to survive the absolute chaos of this offseason and get every single breaking update the second the whistle blows at practice, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now to stay locked into the channel. Are we truly prepared for the absolute heartbreak of watching former premium draft picks get completely buried on the bench, or worse, handed their walking papers before training camp even kicks off? That is the brutal, cold-blooded reality of the National Football League, and it starts tomorrow morning on the practice fields. Look, we all know how the dynamic changes when a brand new coaching staff walks through the door with zero emotional attachment to the guys drafted by the previous regime. They don't care about where you were picked, they don't care about what your contract looks like, and they certainly don't care about the flashes of potential you showed 2 years ago in a completely different scheme. They want production, they want execution, and they want players who fit their highly specific, ultra-aggressive identity. If you can't deliver that the second the ball is snapped in 7-on-7 drills, you are nothing more than a temporary placeholder on a spreadsheet. The defensive front line of fire starting things off at number 10, we have to look directly at the linebacker room and talk about Tommy Eichenberg. Now, let's be entirely fair and authentic about the situation here. Evaluating defensive players during spring practices is one of the most difficult, borderline impossible tasks for any coaching staff because there is zero live tackling, no pads, and absolutely no heavy contact allowed. It is a passing camp dominated by 7-on-7 and light 11-on-11 work, which naturally favors the offense and leaves defenders looking like they're chasing ghosts in space. But for Eichenberg, the clock is ticking incredibly fast. Drafted in the 5th round 2 years ago, he is a classic holdover from an older regime, meaning he has absolutely no built-in loyalty or security blanket with the current decision-makers. When you look at the sheer amount of financial and draft capital this organization has poured into the linebacker position recently, the writing on the wall becomes impossible to ignore. They aren't just looking for starters, they are aggressively building out the bottom of the roster with high-motor special teams demons. They brought in external veteran depth, they've got young hungry players pushing from the bottom, and they have highly touted undrafted free agents who are ready to take someone's job. While Eichenberg likely has the inside track to secure one of those final roster spots based on his raw traits, he cannot afford a slow, sluggish start to the spring. He needs to assert himself as a vocal leader, show elite diagnostic skills in coverage, and get this momentum moving in the right direction immediately, or he will find himself completely marginalized before the team even packs its bags for training camp. Moving down to number 9, the spotlight shifts into the absolute trenches of the defensive line to a man who needs to play like his entire professional life is on the line, defensive tackle Jonah Laulu. If you look at the landscape of the defensive tackle room immediately following the conclusion of the NFL draft, you could easily make the compelling argument that every single veteran in that room walked away as a massive winner. The front office completely ignored the interior defensive line until the absolute tail end of the draft, only selecting Brandon Cleveland in the 7th round with the 229th overall pick. On paper, that looks like a massive vote of confidence for the returning group, but for Laulu, the context is vastly different and infinitely more dangerous than it is for someone like Adam Butler. Butler is sitting comfortably with 2 years remaining on his contract, providing him with a structural safety net that Laulu simply does not possess. Laulu is entering a critical contract year with absolutely no long-term security, meaning he isn't just fighting for playing time in this specific defense, he is fighting for his next contract anywhere in professional football. If he rolls into these voluntary sessions looking complacent, or if he shows even a momentary lack of conditioning, he is going to get buried so deep on this depth chart that he might never see the light of day again. The competition behind the starters is a raging inferno right now. You have dynamic young pieces pushing the pace, and the team still possesses internal depth they traded for last offseason, not to mention a wave of hungry interior players who are desperate to crack the rotation. Laulu has to prove right now that he is the undisputed, definitive complementary force next to Adam Butler on the interior, because if he allows himself to get outshined in unpadded practices, his snaps will evaporate before September arrives. The tremendous tectonic shifts on the offensive line that brings us directly to number 8, where we transition to the offensive side of the ball and look at a massive, towering figure who holds the keys to the entire protection scheme, rookie-turned-sophomore offensive tackle DJ Glaze. Throughout the entire winter and spring, the single biggest, most fiercely debated question mark surrounding this franchise has been entirely focused on the right tackle position. Who is going to step up and protect the perimeter opposite Kolton Miller? The coaching staff and front office have spent the entire offseason publicly backing Glaze, offering glowing endorsements at the NFL Combine and reinforcing that belief at the league owners' meetings. They have gone out of their way to voice their confidence in his development, while also sprinkling in some praise for depth pieces like Charles Grant. The fact that this organization actively chose not to sign a premium, high-priced offensive tackle in the open market of free agency, and subsequently chose not to use a premium draft asset on the position, speaks absolute volumes about how much raw belief they have in Glaze's upside. But let's be completely real for a second, public praise in March and April means absolutely nothing when the cleats hit the grass in May. Glaze is coming off a highly inconsistent, incredibly frustrating campaign last year where he routinely struggled with speed off the edge and mental lapses in pass protection. He desperately needs to recapture the elite, consistent form he displayed during his rookie year, and he has to do it under the watchful eye of a brand new offensive scheme. With depth players like Charles Grant actively nipping at his heels and looking incredibly sharp in early workouts, Glaze cannot afford a single day off. This is his golden opportunity to firmly grasp the starting right tackle job and never let it go, but it requires him to show up to voluntary practices with an entirely different level of technical precision and raw intensity. Now, before we dive headfirst into the absolute heart of the top 7, let's pause and really address the massive elephant in the room regarding how this entire roster is being constructed from top to bottom. Question of the day: which individual player do you personally believe is facing the absolute most career-defining pressure to perform at voluntary practices this month? Is it one of the young, highly drafted wide receivers trying to save their roster spots, or is it a veteran quarterback fighting to keep his career alive? Drop your exact thoughts, your theories, and your raw reactions in the comments section down below right now, because I want to see a massive debate break out in the community over how this depth chart should shake out. The brutal realities of the interior and backfield. Let's keep this momentum rolling right into number 7 on the countdown, and we are staying right on the offensive line with interior guard Caleb Rogers. Rogers was brought in with a massive amount of fan anticipation and draft pedigree last season, selected in the 3rd round at number 98 overall. He was supposed to be the long-term anchor of the interior, a fundamentally sound blocker who could solidify the guard position for the next 5 years. He got some scattered opportunities to prove his worth last season, appearing in 6 games for the Silver and Black, but the tape was deeply concerning, revealing a player who frequently got overpowered by central power rushers and struggled to find his footing in space. The front office clearly saw those same deficiencies on tape, because their response this offseason was an absolute, unmitigated declaration of war on Rogers' job security. They didn't just bring in minor competition, they completely overhauled the interior room. They used a premium draft asset on an absolute mauler. They went out and signed a highly experienced, high-upside veteran in Spencer Burford, and they actively brought back trusted depth pieces like Jordan Meredith who already know the operational demands of the system. If we are being completely honest and transparent with each other, Rogers enters these practices as the 4th or 5th option on the interior depth chart. On paper, Burford, Meredith, and the new rookies are simply better, more consistent football players right now than Caleb Rogers. Now, do I want Rogers to prove me wrong? Absolutely. He is an incredibly likable guy, a phenomenal locker room presence, and he was a decorated team captain during his collegiate days at Texas Tech. His teammates have openly praised him, describing him as a mature, steady father figure type of personality trapped inside a young rookie's physical frame. But character and locker room vibes do not block elite defensive tackles on 3rd and short. When you look at the staggering depth this team has accumulated on the interior, including the massive splash signing of an elite center which inevitably forces other versatile blockers into the guard rotation, Rodgers is staring down a sheer cliff face. Despite his status as a former third-round draft choice, his roster spot is in legitimate, undeniable jeopardy. He has to turn the page, find an entirely new gear, and completely tear it up on the practice field starting tomorrow, or he will find himself on the outside looking in when final cuts arrive. That brings us to number 6, and this one might hurt some feelings in the fan base because we are talking about a massive fan favorite, running back Dylan Laube. Look, we all saw the viral video from earlier this month where Laube was living his absolute best life at a professional hockey game, tearing his shirt off, acting as the ultimate hype man, and sending the entire stadium into an absolute frenzy. The kid has an infectious, undeniable charisma, the fan base absolutely adores him, and by all accounts, the coaching staff loves his work ethic and raw personality. But when you step away from the viral social media clips and look strictly at the cold, hard numbers on the running back depth chart, the situation becomes incredibly terrifying for Laube. The front office made a massive statement this offseason by securing a premier, elite bell cow back, and then they doubled down by aggressively trading up in the draft to secure another highly dynamic weapon for the backfield. Where on earth does that leave Dylan Laube? If I am being completely authentic and realistic about the upcoming season, I don't want to see Laube taking significant snaps on the field if it means he hasn't completely resolved the catastrophic fumbling issues that plagued his tape last year. You cannot put the football on the ground in the National Football League and expect to keep a job. Furthermore, the team brought in a highly intriguing undrafted free agent out of Indiana who possesses deep, foundational ties to the coaching staff's preferred running style, and whose elite ability in pass protection gives him a massive, immediate tactical advantage over Laube. Laube was a 6th-round pick during the current regime's first offseason, meaning they do like his baseline traits, but he has to prove that he can be a reliable, trustworthy 3-down asset. It isn't even about his ability to run between the tackles. He has to prove right now in non-contact sessions that he can execute flawless blitz pickups, protect the quarterback, and be an elite, sure-handed receiver out of the backfield. We heard an immense amount of off-season hype surrounding Laube during his rookie spring, but none of it materialized into actual, tangible production during the preseason or the regular season. The time for potential is completely over. He has to deliver undeniable consistency right now. The high-stakes quarterback and wide receiver conundrums at number 5, we have to talk about the absolute most important position in all of professional sports, and yes, we are putting a major veteran name right here, quarterback Kirk Cousins. Now, I know there are people out there who thought this spot should belong to a younger player, but let's look at the reality of the situation. We know where the young developmental players stand on the depth chart, but Cousins entered this franchise after an incredibly complicated, highly dramatic exit from his previous home. He wanted to be the unquestioned, long-term face of the franchise elsewhere, but after that organization shocked the football world by selecting a young quarterback in the top 10 of the draft, the relationship completely fractured. Now, Cousins finds himself in an entirely different environment, playing on a contract that offers an intriguing mix of immediate salary cap implications and short-term flexibility. While his baseline numbers are locked in for the immediate future, Cousins isn't here to be a short-term band-aid or a bridge quarterback. He wants to be the definitive, undisputed leader of this offense this year, next year, and for the foreseeable future. The only way he secures that leverage and keeps the young guns on the bench is by completely dominating these off-season practices from a mental and execution standpoint. He has the massive advantage of veteran experience, whereas the younger quarterbacks on the roster are still actively trying to master the basic mechanics of taking snaps under center, perfecting their footwork out of play action, and understanding the complex pre-snap adjustments demanded by this offense. Cousins has a pre-existing familiarity with the offensive system being installed, and he needs to leverage that relationship immediately to build an unbreakable, elite chemistry with his primary receivers. The battle for the soul of this offense starts on day 1 of practice, and Cousins has to establish his dominance early. This leads us beautifully to number 4, where we look at a premium physical specimen who needs to finally turn raw potential into concrete production. Wide receiver Dante Thornton Jr. The front office made the highly calculated, deeply risky decision to completely pass on a loaded wide receiver class during the draft. And they did that precisely because they still maintain an immense amount of internal faith in the development of Thornton and his sophomore counterpart. Last off-season, Thornton was the absolute darling of training camp. Standing at a towering 6 feet 5 inches, weighing over 200 pounds, and possessing blazing 4.35 speed, he is a physical marvel who earned staggering pre-draft comparisons to elite mega-talents like Calvin Johnson and Randy Moss. When the players are running around in shorts and t-shirts with zero physical contact, you are going to see the absolute best, most dazzling version of Dante Thornton Jr. His speed is completely unguardable in space when defenders can't jam him at the line of scrimmage. But Thornton's massive issue has never been his performance in unpadded practices, it has been his inability to handle physicality, beat press coverage, and fight through contact when the pads come on. While he cannot legally engage in physical press battles during these voluntary sessions, he must show the coaching staff that his route running has become infinitely more precise, that he is using his frame to shield defenders, and that he can consistently win vertically down the field to open up the entire playbook. He was a fourth-round pick brought in by this front office to be a vertical dynamic threat, but he has a massive fire-breathing dragon breathing down his neck right now. The team drafted an absolute flyer out of Oregon in the 6th round who has been generating an immense amount of quiet buzz within the facility. Thornton cannot afford to let the rookie steal his spotlight or his reps, the secondary shakeups and roster demolitions dropping into number 3, the focus shifts back to the defensive secondary to a player who finds himself sitting on an absolute, undeniable hot seat, safety Isaiah Pola-Mao. Major national sports networks have spent the last week explicitly highlighting Pola-Mao as a prime candidate to be a surprise roster casualty this summer, and I am telling you right now, I completely agree with that assessment. Look at the sheer volume of assets this front office just poured into the defensive backfield. They drafted elite, versatile defensive backs in the early rounds, they aggressively traded up to secure more safety depth, and they signed an absolute powerhouse veteran safety who thrives in that hybrid, box-heavy role. Where in the absolute world does that leave Isaiah Pola-Mao? He is a player who logged well over 1,000 defensive snaps last season, yet according to advanced analytics and performance grading metrics, he finished the year as the single worst-graded safety in the entire National Football League, ranking 98th out of 98 qualified players. It was a catastrophic, completely defensive campaign that exposed his severe limitations in deep coverage and his inconsistency in open field tackling. Now, a lot of that failure can be attributed to a coaching staff that completely mismanaged his skill set and forced him into roles that didn't suit his natural traits. Pola-Mao is at his absolute best when he is playing down near the line of scrimmage, acting as a big, physical box safety who can disrupt the run and lock up tight ends. He needs to use these voluntary practices to completely redefine his value to this brand new defensive coaching staff. He has to show that he can be a dominant, versatile weapon in hybrid packages, especially with major questions surrounding the health and availability of other veteran cornerbacks and safeties at practice. If Pola-Mao can't show immediate, undeniable growth in his coverage assignments and prove that he can be a reliable asset in the new defensive scheme, he won't just lose his starting job, he might find himself completely cut from the roster before the preseason concludes. That brings us to the penultimate spot at number 2, where we find another premium draft asset from last year's class who is running out of time to prove he is a cornerback Darien Porter. Porter was drafted in the 3rd round last season out of Iowa State, possesses the exact physical profile that defensive coordinators absolutely drool over. He is long, he is lanky, he is incredibly athletic, and he has the raw recovery speed to run with any vertical threat in the league. But the actual tape from his rookie season was a complete and utter disaster. He looked entirely lost in zone concepts, routinely gave up massive cushions to opposing wide receivers, and demonstrated a complete inability to find the football in the air. It was incredibly frustrating to watch the coaching staff actively bench a premium 3rd-round pick in favor of lower-tier depth players and waiver wire additions just to survive games. The front office clearly had zero intention of waiting around for Porter to figure things out, because their off-season moves were a direct reflection of their lack of trust in his current development. They moved at lightning speed to re-sign veteran cornerbacks, they aggressively traded up in the draft to secure premium cornerback talent, and they have an abundance of young, hungry nickel and outside defenders who are entirely comfortable taking his job. We have to remind ourselves of the context here. Porter is still incredibly raw because he spent the vast majority of his collegiate career playing wide receiver, only switching to the defensive side of the ball in his final year at Iowa State. He is essentially learning the most difficult position in professional football on the fly at the absolute highest level. While his third-round draft status protects him from being an immediate cut candidate this month, there is already intense speculation within the building that the coaching staff is considering a radical, permanent position switch to free safety just to salvage his athleticism. Porter has to show up to these practices with an entirely different level of mental discipline, lock down his assignments on the perimeter, and prove that he can be a definitive, high-level cornerback in this league before the option is completely taken away from him. The ultimate ultimatum at wide receiver. Finally, we have arrived at the absolute number one player who enters voluntary practices with the absolute most to prove of any single individual on this entire roster, wide receiver section Jack Bech. Bech was selected in the second round of the draft last year out of TCU, carrying massive expectations as a dynamic, versatile weapon who could redefine the intermediate passing game. Instead, his rookie season was an absolute ghost town of production. He was completely phased out of the game plan, barely saw the field, and looked entirely incompatible with the stagnant, uninspired offensive system the team attempted to run last year. But here is where the story takes an incredibly fascinating, high-stakes turn. The team has completely overhauled its offensive philosophy, bringing in a creative, forward-thinking coordinator whose system relies heavily on dynamic blocking wide receivers and complex personnel packages. Bech is a phenomenal, incredibly physical blocker who gives absolute maximum effort in the run game, making him a potentially flawless conceptual fit for this new offense. He has the raw tools to compete for the definitive number 2 wide receiver spot on this roster, but the competition is an absolute meat grinder. The team already has established vertical threats, and they gave out a massive, multi-year contract worth $35 million to another veteran wideout this offseason. Furthermore, with the addition of an elite, generational talent at tight end, this team is going to run a staggering amount of heavy personnel sets where the extra receiver on the field is actually a tight end lined up in the slot. Bech has to explicitly prove to this coaching staff that he cannot be ignored. The incredible news coming out of the facility this week is that Bech has taken this challenge entirely personal. He spent the entire winter locked in the weight room, completely transforming his physique by adding a massive amount of lean muscle and functional weight. People close to the program are openly stating that he is in the absolute best shape of his life and is playing with a massive, undeniable chip on his shoulder. The front office bypassed the wide receiver position in the draft precisely because they still maintain an intense belief in Bech's elite ceiling. The stage is perfectly set for a massive sophomore breakout, but it requires him to completely dominate every single snap of these voluntary practices and assert his dominance as a premier target. The honorable mentions on the roster brink when you step back and look at the entire roster landscape heading into these 10 days of intense practice, it becomes completely obvious that the sheer volume of competition is going to force some incredibly good football players off this team. On the offensive side of the ball, the battle along the interior line is going to be an absolute bloodbath. We need to see depth players like Charles Grant consistently challenge for that starting right tackle spot to keep everyone sharp. There are young interior players who need to show up and remind the entire league exactly who they are after an off-season filled with self-inflicted rumors and media speculation. It would be completely insane for this organization to move on from their highly touted young interior pieces, but they must establish their dominance early. Veterans are going to be fighting tooth and nail with recent signings to secure those final starting guard spots, creating a deep, highly volatile interior rotation that doesn't get nearly enough national credit. On the defensive side of the ball, the honorable mentions are facing an equally terrifying reality. There are young cornerbacks who are sitting squarely on the roster chopping block right now. While the team likely won't move on from premium draft picks like Porter, lower-tier cornerbacks could easily be cut loose if they get outperformed by the incoming wave of undrafted talent. We also have to look closely at the defensive line depth, where multiple players drafted by the previous regime are fighting to find a home in a brand new defensive alignment. The move to a base front completely alters the physical requirements for the interior, leaving multiple young linemen searching for a definitive role. Then you have the linebacker room, where late-round picks from last year need to prove they can provide an elite, physical pop on special teams units to survive the summer. And finally, we have to talk about the pass rush rotation and look at a veteran like Malcolm Koonce. Koonce is playing on a high-stakes, one-year contract, meaning he is on a definitive, prove-it, deal before hitting the open market next spring. The front office hedged their bets by drafting another explosive edge rusher in the mid-rounds, putting immense pressure on Koonce to perform. He finished last season on an absolute tear, playing the best football of his career, but there were lingering concerns about his lower body stability and overall confidence returning from injury. Kuntz must show this coaching staff immediately that his health is at 100%, that his burst off the line of scrimmage is completely elite, and that he can be a dominant, premier force on third down passing situations. If he allows himself to get outshined or outworked by the younger edge rushers on the roster, he will find his snaps severely limited, completely destroying his chances of securing the massive, life-changing payday he wants next offseason. The battles start tomorrow, the pressure is completely overflowing, and only the strongest will survive the silver and black crucible.